Hello and welcome to our program, Where God Weeps, a program where we speak about the situation of the suffering church around the world. Today we're going to be talking about the country of Mexico, a country of contrasts, of urban blight and natural beauty, of wealth and great poverty. Mexico is a country of 106 million, of which 83% call themselves Catholic. To tell us more, it is my very great privilege to welcome Father Brian Kolodiejchuk, the Father Superior of the Missionary of Charity Fathers, who has lived in Mexico for over 20 years. Father Brian, thank you for being with us here today in our program.
You're most welcome. Happy to be here.
Father Brian, you come from the cold and harsh winter climates of Winnipeg, Canada. How did you find yourself in these temperate climes of Mexico?
Well, I remember the first day arriving to Mexico and then seeing the palm trees. And I said, wow, palm trees. Never did I see palm trees in Winnipeg. But no, actually the climate, the weather is quite beautiful, actually. It's quite moderate, never too cold, and nothing like the cold of Winnipeg.
Winnipeg.
And doesn't get so hot, neither the hot of Calcutta, so it's quite pleasant to live there.
You were raised in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in Canada. What was it like for you growing up in Canada in this kind of an environment?
Well, actually, that was my experience, and I was an altar boy for many years and in a minor seminary with the Redemptorist Fathers. And so I grew up, and still my predilection is to icons, and that, and so it's, and I still use some of the prayers. So it's a very beautiful spirituality. The liturgy is so beautiful, very rich, and so I'm very happy to have been raised in that tradition.
Did you have a moment, if you will, an aha moment, a moment where you knew that you were going to become a priest, or actually not so much that, but before, when you had a sense of God's presence in your life? Was it like St. Paul, or how was this for you?
Well, yeah, I don't think I could say I had kind of a St. Paul aha moment. Rather, just growing up, and even I remember being a small boy, 4 or 5 years old, before kindergarten, celebrating liturgy and interrupting my mother on the telephone to give her communion and such things. So I had this desire from a small boy, and it kept on growing, and it stayed with me until, and I was in the minor seminary in Toronto for the pre-novitiate program.
But there was one person who was decisive in your vocation.
Oh yes, Mother Teresa, very much so, because my parents and I went from Winnipeg after I'd left the Redemptorist before novitiate, and so I was kind of a free agent, I like to say. And so my parents and I went to Rome to see my sister, who was about to enter into the novitiate of the Missionaries of Charity. And so there I met Mother, and then we used to go for a morning mass, and then in the afternoon holy hour, and we would help in the home. So Mother Teresa knew I was a brother of one of her sisters, and later the sisters told me, "Oh, we were praying for you." So it's dangerous when the sisters start praying for you, and so the contemplative brothers were beginning at that moment, and that time. So we had the opening ceremony, and during that she pinned the cross on one priest and 5 young Italians. And then at the end, as we were leaving, she greeted my parents in my turn, and she said, "I want to pin a cross on you too." So I was like, very young, 21-year-old, impressionable, and Mother Teresa tells you this, so you have to.
You think about it.
Yeah, you think about it. So I didn't even say anything. Only the next day I spoke with her and said, "Well, what did you mean?" And so she said, "No, come, join." And it was brothers, not priesthood. So at that time I was kind of not determined exactly what my vocation was. And actually I had a girlfriend in Toronto, so I had to leave her.
You have now been 20 years in Mexico. You are now the Superior General of the Missionary of Charity Fathers. Having lived so long in Mexico, how would you describe the faith of the Mexican people?
Well, I really say I love Mexico. I love the Mexican people, and I even hope to be a citizen soon. And so it was very different at first, coming from, say, Canada, even the United States kind of a culture, and into the very warm and friendly and loving and welcoming culture of Mexico. And so it took a while, but they're very, I enjoy very much, and I find them very warm, open, and loving.
Because it is said that 83% of Mexicans declare themselves as Catholic, but the reality of the practice is somewhat other, as in many countries. How do you describe this? How would you explain this faith?
Well, I think maybe the easiest way to say is that there is a faith that is there, even a solid faith, but I would say maybe in many instances is an unformed faith, and so that is it's a challenge for proclamation of the gospel, the new evangelization that the church is asking us for, and so that's also one place that also needs that new evangelization, and so that's the opening for the evangelicals or the other people who come and take advantage of that, let's say.
I'd like to come to talk about this question of the landscape with the evangelical growth and so on. But first there is one unifying factor that unifies all Mexicans, as we know, and that is Our Lady of Guadalupe. The story of Juan Diego, the peasant, the Indian, Our Lady who is also addressed as an Indian, a pregnant Indian mother. Mexicans identify themselves so strongly. Why is it that Our Lady of Guadalupe plays such an important role in Mexico?
Well, the apparition of Our Lady in the image, the tilma that still is there, miraculously, that's still there after all these centuries, is an extraordinary gift and an extraordinary grace. So it's the people have that sense, I think, and they really appreciate that Our Lady came, and in some sense, through that image, is still present. And
the image itself is actually a story. I mean,
well, yeah, for uneducated people who didn't, have education like we have in that time, the image, they almost literally read the image. So all the symbolism, say, foreigners would not get, but they knew exactly. So it was exactly designed for them, and they would be able to read it, and that was the first evangelization was through the image, because before that the Spanish weren't overly successful in their evangelization, but the image just changed the whole thing, and I forget the exact numbers, but a number of years, like literally millions of baptisms. So,
Father Brian, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to watch now a story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, of Juan Diego, and a little bit about the situation in Mexico today.
Juan Diego, a Chichimeca Indian, is one of the most famous people in the history of Mexico. A poor peasant, he experienced the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe from the 9th to the 12th of December 1531. Although it has been 5 centuries since that event, Juan Diego's image continues to carry meaning, especially for the indigenous populations. Juan Diego is beloved, respected and worshipped. The popular devotion is witnessed everywhere, whether street or path. Mexican geography is characterized through images of the saint. They may or may not have artistic value, but the indigenous take pride in them. The apparition to Saint Juan Diego today proposed as a model for the lay people and as an instrument for the evangelization of the country caused a revolution at that time regarding the indigenous culture, traditions and lifestyle, as significantly the Virgin spoke to him in a native dialect, Nahuatl.
For them, this means that God has always borne them in mind, that the Virgin Mary loves them. The Virgin Mary did not speak Spanish, she spoke Nahuatl. They consider it absolutely key that the Virgin used one of their dialects. In this way, they understand that they are important to God.
Official figures estimate that there are 500,000 fully identified indigenous living in Mexico City. However, more realistic estimates state that about 2 million indigenous live in the social and political center of the country. They not only face difficult economic challenges, they also confront racial discrimination. Many of them, for instance, are unable to get a job because they belong to one of the many indigenous communities in the country. They are rejected because they belong to a different culture, they speak another language, or because they have a darker complexion.
El Juan Diego de hoy que llega, que sufre.
They symbolize the Juan Diego of today, the Juan Diego arriving in a city, suffering, the Juan Diego that continues being discriminated against. That is why it is a shame that here, a country where so many indigenous siblings live, they continue being rejected.
Muchos hermanos indígenas sigan siendo rechazados.
It is necessary to be like Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ preaches the word, but he also worries about the poor, the sick, and about those who are suffering. It is for us to say, if we want to be faithful to Christ's mission, we cannot remain inattentive when we see these people suffering such serious limitations.
Mexico City is one of the largest cities and the most populated capitals in the world. It is a challenge of survival for those among the poor. It is a country of great contrasts, tremendous wealth, and yet deep poverty and marginalization, especially among the indigenous that have migrated from afar in search of a solution to the poverty at home. Many times it is only the church who opens the doors and offers them the comfort of faith. And if we speak about faith in Mexico City, it is to the Guadalupe Basilica that millions seek solace each year. Thousands of Mexicans come on a pilgrimage to the shrine every day. Everyone's prayer is unique, personal, and exclusive. Many still speak Nahuatl, a dialect used by the Indian Juan Diego nearly 5 centuries ago. But the relationship between indigenous culture and Catholic Church has not been established only in areas of faith and culture. This relationship has become more than that. Today the Church is the place where indigenous people are accepted as they are. They share their experiences and gather strength to face the hostile environment that can be Mexico City.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our program Where God Weeps. We're here today talking with Father Brian Kolodiejchuk, the Superior General of the Missionary of Charity Fathers based in Mexico. Father Brian, thank you for being with us here again in our program.
You're most welcome.
Father, I'd like to talk a little bit about the challenges within the Catholic faith, the decline of the Catholic faith. I've got a few statistics here I'd like to read to you. In Mexico, there was a census in 2010 showing that Catholicism in Mexico is in decline. In 1950, 98% of Mexicans said they were Catholic. Today, that percentage is at 83%. This signifies that over the last decade, Mexico has seen an average of 1,300 people a day leaving the Catholic Church. What's going on? Why are Mexicans fleeing the Catholic Church in such numbers?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much fleeing as the influence of the Protestant who come in and evangelize the people.
But there must be something that's not working.
Well, part of it is just the change in culture, the influence of secularity, just like in other places. And there's, as I was saying before, there's the challenge of an unformed faith. So I think the challenge is where it is in other places, where the church is asking for the new evangelization. And they had the latest continental meeting of all the bishops, and one of the fruits of that was that the church is to be in like perpetual mission. and so they call it a continental mission. And I know where in Tijuana, where I live, the Archdiocese of Tijuana and is having missions, evangelization, the proclamation of the kerygma, the gospel in the parishes. So it's change is beginning. Effort is, the bishops have understood the challenges, and the effort is beginning of the new evangelization, the proclamation of the gospel again. And so it's there, and steps are being taken. It will take some years, I think, before the fruit is there, but it's moving. Where the church is moving.
In the same census, it showed that in 1950 the Protestants or the evangelical churches numbered about 1.8%. In 2010, this number is now at 8%. Why is the growth of the evangelical and the Protestant churches moving up so quickly?
Well, I think they're making more of an effort to come and cross the border, and so that's, saying the people, if they're not sufficiently formed, then they don't have the wherewithal to answer what is being told them, and a certain simplicity, and it's easy enough to follow, and I don't think they have any sense of this is the true church and this is not the true church and those kind of things. So, as I say, it's still a challenge for the Catholic Church to really do the new evangelization.
So what do we do? So, I mean, aside, the question is not so much the Protestants are making inroads. The Protestants are obviously answering a need that
right.
And they're filling a vacuum, which begs the question, where is it coming from and why is the Catholic Church not able to provide this? So how do we reach out? How do we evangelize the young people today? How can we draw on, for example, the example of Mother Teresa to reach out and attract these young people to the church?
Well, I think that's part of it, because even when Mother Teresa was alive, when they would do little polls and opinion polls, and Mother Teresa was one of the most admired women in the world, and also John Paul II. In Mexico, they have a great love for John Paul II from his first visit, when he was first elected the Pope, and his several visits. So like everywhere else, young people like to see concrete things, and so you have a different kind of an apostle. I mean, John Paul being a pope is one thing, and then Mother Teresa and the MCs is another thing. Very much putting many of his teachings into practice, but exactly just to present in a positive way and to be with the youth, spend time with them, accompany them, and that is also the key.
But to set the hearts on fire. I mean, there's I suppose secularization, globalization, all of these influences that are playing on the young people today. The distractions are there, but the distractions are empty. So how do we...
Yeah, well, I think like what we do with our youth groups is also to have, it's like the volunteers who go to Calcutta, the same with the youth. You get them involved and on fire by saying, well, here. And so our youth, for example, go to the sisters and they help serve, and they meet the old people and they feed them and take care of them. And like Mother Teresa used to say, even the volunteers or we ourselves, we even receive more than we give. But for the youth to be able to have this experience and the joy of being focused outward, because as the culture kind of encourages a certain selfishness, or the focus is on me and my wants and my pleasure, and this is for me. And this is the opposite, and that gospel paradox of losing your life for the sake of gaining it, as is right there, as you go outside of yourself and serve, and you also receive. But in order to do that, you have to make that effort to be focused out of yourself.
I think one of the last statistics is probably the most tragic one, is that the 2010 survey indicated that 5.2 million young people professed no faith at all, which is, for Mexican culture, embedded in such the history of Mexico, of persecution as well, which has given the flower of faith. To have young people saying we believe in nothing is a tragedy.
Right, but that's the challenge, because one of our priests was just telling me his experience on the airplane, where he met a young girl here in Europe, and from Argentina, and she asked questions, and she had never heard of any of these things. So you say, well, Argentina has a Catholic history too. So for some way, and lots depends on the family that you're raised. If your parents don't raise, or you don't know, and you take for granted just what you're exposed to. So part of it is in some way, that's why John Paul II, Pope Benedict has asked even for creative new ways of evangelization. So it's not sufficient anymore to give a talk or something. That's necessary and has its value, but to be with them, to spend time with them, accompany them, and one-to-one, being with them, what's going on, how's your experience, what does this mean, and that kind of thing.
To find them where they are.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yes.
You mentioned Pope Benedict's recent visit to Mexico. Why did Pope Benedict choose now to come to Mexico, and what would be the fruits of this visit?
Well, the formal reason, let's say, is that it's the 200th anniversary of independence of Mexico and in other Latin American countries. So that was kind of the official reason to come and just to visit. And then also, especially in Mexico, there's been a problem with violence, as the world knows, and with drugs and these kind of things. So the other purpose was to animate, to give hope to the people. And as he said in his message, it's important for all of us to live our faith in daily life and to put it into practice. And as John Paul, Pope Benedict has spoken, the change and transformation of society begins with each person, our own heart. And so that was something of the message. And as I say, the Mexicans have a great love for John Paul, and they have a great love for Pope Benedict. They wear the sombrero a couple times. And so that kind of, I think, changed the opinion. Somehow, people think Pope Benedict was very distant and something which is not him at all. And so I think it was a great fruit of the visit, just to realize that he's also a wonderful man. And then to receive they have a great sense of our Father is coming to visit us and to encourage us and to give us hope. So I think that's, there's no, tangible, material way of measuring those things, but I'm sure just being with our people. Yeah, just being with our people, and just that he came and there was excitement and watching him. And so it's, I think.
So if you were to say, identify also for the people being with us today in our program, for their prayers, let's say prayer intentions, for you it would be new evangelization, the changing of the heart. And Mother Teresa said, the transformation of the heart. Mm-hmm. This is what we should be praying for.
Yeah, and again, Mother Teresa, fundamental part of her message is, she would sometimes, you don't have to go to Calcutta. You can see who are the ones who need right around you. Even love begins in your own family, And just small things. One of her, favorite expressions was small things, great love. Ordinary things, extraordinary love. So the value of all what we do, it's not even the things that we do, but it's the love with which we do them. And that's the message for everybody, and in their daily life, to the grandmother, to the mother, to the little child, or the young people, it's love. It's love.
Father Brian, thanks for being with us today in our program.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today on Where God Weeps. If you'd like to know more about the story of Catholics in Mexico, the need for prayers, the need for the transformation of the heart, for evangelization, perhaps how you might be able to help, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.